The world looks completely different from the right hemisphere of the brain as compared to the view from the left hemisphere. Death looks different, life looks different, everything looks different. And there is a time-honored method for shifting your point of view from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. Some people call it ceasing the chatter of the mind, but we can also call it shutting down the left hemisphere. So this video is the first in a series about all that. Hi. Let us start with the bottom line. There are two completely different answers to the question, what is death? One is the answer given by the left hemisphere of our brain, and the other is the answer given by the right hemisphere of our brain. The answer given by our left hemisphere is that death is the end of all human experience, a tragic and completely unwelcome event, and some mysterious punishment that we do not deserve. The answer given by our right hemisphere is that death is destiny, and therefore it is opportunity. The completion and expansion of human experience. A reward of the amazing fact that we exist at all in the first place. And the implication, of course, is that no matter what we experience between birth and death, all of that experience is completely incomplete. So here I am telling you this, and here you are listening to my words. Does this complete the transaction? No, it does not complete the transaction. It cannot complete the transaction. There is a Chinese proverb about this. If you want to know the taste of a pear, you have to eat the pear. If you want to know what your right hemisphere knows, then you have to migrate your consciousness from your left hemisphere to the right hemisphere of your brain. And the method for doing this is very well known. It is a technique called cease the chatter of the mind. Now, naming this technique and performing this technique are two vastly different things. Once you name it, then you have to do it. The left hemisphere of our brain is so essential to our physical survival that all cultures of all times have inculcated passionate habits of clinging to the activity of our left hemisphere. After all, the left hemisphere makes tools, makes language, makes science. It intervenes between us and the forces of nature, and it organizes society. However, in performing all of these tasks, the left hemisphere always draws on the raw experience collected by the right hemisphere of our brain. the energy that passes into and through our body in the form of what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, and most importantly, what we touch and feel. Our kinesthetic sense, that energy of sensation that impinges on us from the outside of our skin, and reverberates inside our skin in amazingly complex forms and levels. This is why Elaine McGilchrist called his book The Master and His Emissary, because the right hemisphere is the master, but the left hemisphere gets all the attention. So if you want to know what death is really, then me telling you is not going to achieve that. That would be like me telling you what is the taste of a pear. Right. Kind of a waste of time. You need to get your hands on a pear. So now we have named the process. Let's see if we can say anything actually useful about how it looks and feels. The good news is that ceasing the chatter of the mind is a completely natural process. It involves the two hemispheres of the brain, and everybody's brain has two hemispheres. So everybody can do it. And you can start right now, in fact. No equipment is needed. The universal starting point is to shut up, take a very deep breath, and relax. The bad news is that ceasing the chatter of the mind and engaging our right hemisphere is actually a physical skill. In particular, it tends to rearrange the organization of our emotions. And rearranging the organization of your emotions is a physical, neurological process. It will rearrange neurons and neuroprocessors, things like serotonin and dopamine. It will very likely uncover trauma imprints, which then need to be released. The fact of the matter is that the left hemisphere controlled system of emotional management suppresses a lot and therefore can be a minefield. So, the basic overarching principle that governs shutting down the left hemisphere of the brain is not to be in a hurry. The whole process has to be bathed in slowness and relaxation. Slow, easy breathing is the rule. It's kind of like learning how to ride a bicycle, or learning how to type, or dribble a football. We all start as beginners. Think about your first keystrokes in typing class. Then we pick up experience as we go along, and when we get to a high level of skill, we reach that lovely state of mind that in Zen they call beginner's mind. A reference to the fact that everything we know between birth and death is completely incomplete. And now we know this not because someone else has told us so, but because on our own, completely on our own, we get it. So people sometimes need help when they're making this transition. I myself never had a teacher. I did get important help at certain points along the way, some therapy, some New Age personal growth seminars, that I took in the 1980s. And I have done tons of reading, but I'm basically self-taught. However, in this day and age, there is a lot of help available. There are books, there are communities, there are teachers. However, there are good and bad books. There are healthy and unhealthy communities. There are really good and really bad teachers. It was always this way. Essentially, you are on your own. But the result is incalculably satisfying. And the process is basically completely natural. It is ultimately just about what is real. Shunryu Suzuki put it this way: when you realize that everything is just a flashing into the vast universe, then you become very strong and your existence becomes very meaningful. And this realization, of course, means consciously knowing what your right hemisphere knows. So the purpose of this video is simple and basic. It's to introduce us with some deliberateness and focus to this process of shifting consciousness and to help us kickstart it. The process is not religious. It is not medical. It is purely natural. It's just about organizing your brain. There are a lot of other interesting questions we can talk about later on if you're interested. For instance, everything the left hemisphere has ever had to say about death is completely wrong. My favorite example of this is the Christian hymn, the Dies Irae, which was written in the 14th century, around the time of the Black Plague, and then got brought into what in the Middle Ages Christians were calling the Requiem Mass, the Mass for the souls in purgatory. And it continued being recited in that ritual for, they were still doing it when I was a kid in the 1960s. And of course, it received wonderful dramatic treatment by Mozart, Verdi, and some others. You know, very dramatic, scary piece of music. So that's my favorite example of the left hemisphere getting death completely wrong. Also, it's worth talking about at some point that Jesus of Nazareth, Gautama the Buddha, Lao Tzu were all right hemisphere virtuosos. However, popular Christianity has always been a left hemisphere institution. How did that happen? Well, Christian Europe started out as a completely traumatized population and needed heavy sedatives to maintain its sanity. So interior investigation, which is kind of the essence of this process that we're talking about, was completely crippled. It's a very interesting phenomenon, quite complicated and fascinating. Let's see, an issue we'll run into as we go along is the fact that in conscious shifting of your focus of attention from left hemisphere to right hemisphere, there is a huge issue about staying awake versus going into trance. It's a biggie. It will come up inevitably. I can tell you the story of how it's taken me 40 years to shift my consciousness. I actually have that story pretty much in print on my Tumblr blog. I made all the mistakes and followed all the blind alleys. I can also recommend a couple of movies, but that would all be for later on in the process. Right now, this is just about opening a door, taking a first step. Thanks for paying attention.